treating yourself with kindness. So if somebody says something to you, so let's take, for example, somebody who is carrying a lot of pain. They've been given huge amounts of opportunities to heal that, but they choose not to. They choose not to sit in their own darkness, in their own shadows, and do the work that is needed. And when you're with somebody like that, you can't do anything for them. It's their journey. You can't force them to do that. But also, you don't have to tolerate the toxicity that becomes their life because they're unwilling, because they're carrying so much baggage. It's not because they're a toxic person. It's because of what's going on within them that creates a toxicity. Welcome to Spiritual Midwife, the podcast that tenderly guides you through the transformative journey of spiritual awakening and personal development towards the ultimate destination of soul sovereignty. I'm Claire Attio, a medicine woman and dedicated guide to the profound realm of soul sovereignty, and you are listening to Spiritual Midwife. Hello, my beautiful souls. In today's episode, we're going to be focusing on forgiveness. And I did do a video on this past Tuesday over on my YouTube channel. And we talked about forgiveness being the purest expression of love. And that was aligned with the resurrection of Christ and that being all about forgiveness. But what I want to dig into today is I want to dig into the fact that it's a cycle. Yes, forgiveness is the purest expression of love, but we have to love ourselves sufficiently to acknowledge the fact that there are things within our energetic body, within our mind, that sit heavy with us, that need forgiving. And so it is one of those cycles. We have to have sufficient self-love to be able to apply the forgiveness so that we can embody greater self-love unconditionally. And this is where it can get tricky. And so what I want to do in this episode is I want to give you 10 or so really practical steps of one, identifying where that forgiveness is needed, what is actually needed to be done. So the first one is acknowledging your feelings. And when we've been hurt, when there's been a situation that has left us in pain, whether we've actually done that to ourselves or whether that has come from an exterior environment, somebody else creating a painful situation, we need to allow ourselves to acknowledge what we're feeling, whether that's the hurt, whether it's the anger, whether it's the pain. We have to acknowledge it. We have to recognize it, and we have to accept the emotions that we're feeling without judgment. So it's just allowing them to come up without going, oh, well, I shouldn't be feeling this, or I shouldn't be thinking that, or they shouldn't have done this and they shouldn't have done that. It's stepping away from that judgment and going, actually, that situation, I felt XYZ. I felt anger. It made me really angry, or I felt deeply hurt. That cut really, really deep. The problem that we have as humans is we take it to the mind and we go, why did that happen? And as a coach, I'm always saying to you, find your whys. But in these given situations, it's best not to try and analyze why that occurred. Just acknowledge the emotions and step away from them, or try to step away from them. Acknowledge the emotions, don't judge them, and then look at, okay, what can I learn from that? Because from any given situation, we can learn something. Was it because we didn't have a boundary in place, or was our boundary not sufficient? Was it that I didn't listen to your intuition? Were you seeing the red flags but ignoring them? very often that is why we feel so hurt, because we have let ourselves down. And yet the majority of the time we project that onto the other person. You did this and you did that. And so it's really important just to take that breath, to step back and really be honest with ourselves, and to acknowledge what we're feeling without that judgment and without the projection. The second one is understand the situation. Try to understand the perspective of the other person who hurt you, if there is another person involved. And as I said in the first one, don't get too into the mind of making up stories. Stay with the facts. It's very easy when we're trying to make sense of something to add to the actual event. Oh, well, they did that because 5 years ago, this happened to them, blah, 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 blah. We don't actually know that unless we have that conversation, unless we have evolved to a point where both have a level of emotional intelligence that there can be truth there, honesty there. We don't actually know that. But what I like to do when I'm applying the forgiveness is to always hold in my mind that people that hurt us are because they're hurting themselves. Now, I don't have to get into the why they're hurt or why they're not doing the healing that's needed and why they perpetually do this. All I have to know in that moment is hurt people hurt people. That's the situation that has happened. These are the emotions that I need to deal with. And also, what do I need to put in place for the future so this doesn't occur again? And it's not about building walls. It's about putting up those boundaries very clearly. We don't want to barricade ourselves in so that we don't have relationships with people. There will be situations where you just need to just cut off all ties. If there's a lack of reciprocity, if there's a lack of respect, and you've seen that, then you pull away. There are other situations where it will be a partner, and you will go, okay, what do I need to do? What boundaries do I need to start putting in place? What work do I need to do on myself so that they understand that this is not acceptable behavior? You can't force them to change. You can't force them to do the inner work. But what you can do is you can set your boundaries, set your standards of what's acceptable for you to receive. The other thing with understanding the situation is, again, is it a momentary lapse? Are they under excessive amounts of stress? Do they have something going on in their life in that moment that is taking up all their energy and taking up all their mental capacity? Was their tongue sharp because they're under stress? And I think this is where the next one comes in, which is the practice empathy. So it's looking at the situation. Is that their normal preset? Are they always sharp-tongued, or was that out of character for them? And if it was out of character, applying the third aspect, the empathy, why are they out of character? Is there anything I can do to help and assist them? Making sure that they understand that what they just did wasn't acceptable, but doing it in a loving, supporting way, not in a judgmental way, not in a, you just hurt me, and starting an argument. That's the last thing they need to do if they're under huge amounts of pressure and stress. The way to approach that situation is, can we have a talk? You said X, Y, and Z, and I found that very hurtful in the way it was said, and that's really out of character for you. And I just want to check that you're okay. I just want to check that, is there anything that I have done that has offended you for you to do that? Or is there anything I can do to help you? What's going on in your life? We apply that empathy. We take ourselves out of the emotions, because emotions make us reactive. So we deal and recognize the emotions to begin with. We release them, and then we go back in and have that conversation without being emotionally charged. And it's really beautiful to be able to do that, because it kind of nips things in the bud instantly, and it gives everybody the chance to go, well, actually, it shows the person that you're actually doing that for, that one, that you care, two, you're actually noticing, and three, you've opened a door for them to be able to have a shoulder to lean on. I mean, we can't take people's stresses and worries and woes away from them. And very often we shouldn't, because that's part of their life lessons. But we can show that we support. We can be and should be actively listening to what's going on and be energetically supportive, emotionally supportive to them. The fourth is letting go of resentment. And this is what I discussed in the YouTube video. If you want to watch that, I will put the link in the description box below. But it's that those old wounds, those old negative feelings that we felt, but we never processed and released. And we then harness resentment for that pain that was caused to us. And we repeat it in our minds. We not only harness, but we actually do ourselves harm. And this is one of the reasons why I say forgiveness is a precursor to unconditional self-love, because if we're holding on to those pains, we're actually hurting ourselves every time we allow our minds to bring up that memory, and we feel that pain all over again, like it just happened yesterday. We are not being self-loving, because we are causing that pain to ourselves by holding on to that resentment, by holding on to that given situation. And this over time can and does cause physical ailments. Resentment, for example, is arthritis. Time and time again, there is so much research out there where you can actually see this. It creates arthritis. We get stiffness in our joints. We get physical pain then from holding on to these really negative feelings that should have no place within us. If we're resenting, it's because we very often felt that we never had a voice in that given moment. We never got to say that you hurt me, or we never got to say that is not appropriate, or we never got to say, I'm sorry, that's your shit, you keep it. And I say that tongue in cheek, but very often we have to give back, especially when we're in relationships, especially with family dynamics. There's a lot of projection. Most of us have come from dysfunctional families, and I don't say that with any ill will. It's the progression of humanity. Our parents did so much better than their parents. We are evolving. And as I've said in other episodes, I'm not sure whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on the podcast, but I have talked about how in generations past, they were very much in physical survival mode. We have the privilege now to have that psychological learning. We've got the space. We're generally comfortable, or most of us are. We generally have food on our tables and a roof over our head. And so we have been afforded the ability to discover and uncover and work on the dysfunctional psychological aspects of our interactions. If we're holding on to resentment, it's usually because we felt disempowered. And again, it comes on to the process of that soul sovereignty. We need to bring in the self-love to be able to apply the forgiveness, so that we can bring in even greater self-love. And as we bring in even greater self-love, we can then start to really empower ourselves. We can start to get our unique, authentic voice back. When people feel disempowered, it's because there's been a pattern learnt that has told them that it's not safe to stand up for themselves. It's not safe to speak up. And this is what we need to start releasing. And when we're children, that can feel like the case. Sometimes, I grew up in a generation, you didn't speak back to your parents. You did not speak back. You just didn't. You just didn't. And so there were very many situations where, for all intents and purposes, they were wrong. But as a child, we weren't afforded the opportunity to actually go, you know what, Dad, you know what, Mum, you're wrong. That just didn't occur in our generation. It's changing, and it's changing because people are doing this work. People are elevating their levels of consciousness. They are working on their emotional intelligence. And as parents, we are allowing our children to express themselves more. Now, some of you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing. Their children still need boundaries. They still need guidelines. When you take away all those boundaries and guidelines, it's finding that balancing act. And we're still a work in progress when it comes to that, where we're actually setting them the boundaries, but without stifling their expression. But if you've held on to resentment, you can guarantee you're running a program there that has disempowered your voice to speak up to yourself. And that's down to you. That's not down to the person that caused you the pain 20 years ago. That's down to you. You're still holding that. You're not loving yourself enough. You're so disempowered. You're not bringing in that self-love to say, hey, I don't need this in my life. That happened 20 years ago. For goodness sake, just let it go. And it's not just a verbal let it go. It's actually letting go of the emotions. And we do that a lot in energy work, just releasing them. I use the chakras, push them out through the chakras and allow the violet flame to transmute them into love again and send that energy back to the ethers. There are many, many different techniques, healing techniques we can actually use to disperse the energies, the negative energies and negative feelings of these resentments. They're just like baggage that we're carrying around that just makes us feel heavy. And when something similar happens, of course, because we're carrying this baggage that already feels heavy, we're completely triggered. That's when we don't recognize that somebody's having a bad day, that is not their normal preset. That is when we can go, rather than go, whoa, okay, what's the matter? This is not you. What's going on here? How can I help? We don't recognize that because we're carrying the baggage. And so we go into our own story, we go into our own pain, and then we start playing energetic pain ping pong with that other person rather than being able to take a breath, step back and go, oh, that hurt. Oh, that's not how you normally are. What's going on? And that takes us into focusing on the present. Instead of dwelling on those past grievances or those current grievances, focus on what that person is like or what is good in your life now. And how can you continue to move forward positively? And this is where the self-compassion comes in. Treating yourself with kindness. So if somebody says something to you, let's take, for example, somebody who is carrying a lot of pain. They've been given huge amounts of opportunities to heal that, but they choose not to. They choose not to sit in their own darkness, in their own shadows, and do the work that is needed. And when you're with somebody like that, you can't do anything for them. It's their journey. You can't force them to do that. But also, you don't have to tolerate the toxicity that becomes their life because they're unwilling, because they're carrying so much baggage. It's not because they're a toxic person. It's because of what's going on within them that creates a toxicity. This is where you need to practice that self-compassion. You cannot change that person. So do you actually allow that person to continually hurt you? Or do you show yourself? Do you recognize within yourself that that is what is going on with them and you need to step away? You need to show yourself kindness and understanding without being judgmental. It's like, ooh, that's who you are. I can't help you with that. I'm not going to judge you, but I'm not going to tolerate it either. And I need to step away because I'm going to show myself kindness. I love myself sufficiently that I don't need to become part of whatever's going on in your world. It's not judging them, it's making a judgment call for yourself. And there's a huge difference, and I think people get this confused a lot, between judging somebody and making a judgment call. When you're making a judgment call, you're assessing the situation and you are doing what's best for you and those around you. And when I say that, a lot of people go, oh, well, you're not doing what's best for them because you've pulled away from them. Actually, yeah, I have, because I'm not feeding it. I'm not going to feed whatever paradigm they've got going on there. That's just going to hold them in that negative cycle for longer. You step away. That takes us into open communication. And it takes us back to what I was saying with the letting go, that disempowerment with the resentment. Are we practicing sufficient self-love? Do we have enough spark within us to really start to open our throat chakra and to speak our truths? And this is why it's all cyclical. This is why it's a process. When I talk about the soul sovereignty, it's a complete process and it takes time, because there will be some days where you feel confident, where you've brought in that self-love, where you have those positive energies, when life is going good and you can have difficult conversations without being emotionally charged, without being judgmental or aggressive, where you can be positively assertive and express your needs without creating discord. And there will be other days where it makes you feel nervous. And that's when we tend to blunder, because our nerves then create an emotional charge within us. And it's all about learning. It's about practice. It's about going, actually, yeah, okay, I feel nervous about doing this, but I need to do it for me. And that's when you slow down what you're saying. Because what can happen when we feel nervous, and we've all done it, if any of you have done public speaking or you've had to do a speech, you're nervous, and so you rush through it. Blah, 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 blah. You either tumble your words or you say the wrong thing. Slow it down. Use the breath. Allow the divine to guide you. We all have that divine connection. And when we allow ourselves, when we slow ourselves down sufficiently to allow that connection to come in through us, it helps us find the right words. It helps us to be able to express ourselves authentically, express our needs with truth, and to keep us grounded whilst we're doing it, so we can dissipate that nervous energy. Understand, take the time and understand what your needs are. All of us are unique, and so those needs will be different. And within those needs comes the boundaries. What boundaries do you need to set? Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or condoning, not at all. It's about setting yourself free so that you can continue to move forward. As I've said, when we hold resentment, we've got all those heavy bags to carry. When we think about those situations, if we hold on to them and we think, oh, so and so did that to me, we keep going back to the old story. And so what we're actually doing is we are going backwards rather than forwards. Set the boundaries. Don't condone the incident that happened. Don't forget it. And a lot of people say, oh, you need to forget it. No, you don't forget it. What you do is you move through the emotions, you get rid of the emotions, you get rid of the pain so you don't feel that. So you're not living in an old story, you're not going backwards. But very often there are gems, there are lessons. I've said this, and I said this right at the beginning. We take and we can use those stories to help other people, but they're not stories charged with emotion. They're not stories that are taking us back and creating that cycle all over again. They're just like, okay, this is an example of what happened. This is an example of what I actually did to get up X, Y, and Z situation. This is an example of what happened, and this is why I created this boundary for myself. This is what I learned. This is how I moved forward. That can be very inspirational. People learn by examples. People learn by stories. When we go back to indigenous cultures, everything was passed down through storytelling. So you set those healthy boundaries so that people fully understand what you're willing to accept in your life, not expect. Expect is something very different. And we'll do another podcast on that. But what you're willing and not willing to accept in the future, moving forward. And when appropriate, be open to that reconciliation. When I say that, also be aware that there has to be an apology. It's not because you're judging them, but it's because you need to know that they have understood and are taking ownership of whatever created that situation in the first place. It's not about asking for an apology. It's about, are they going to step forward and give you that because they are taking responsibility and accountability for their actions at that time? Have they recognized that? Have they learned that lesson? Do they understand that they overstepped your boundaries? Do they understand that in that moment, and maybe for some time coming up to it, they were not showing respect? It's not something you ask for, but be open to looking at the situation again, should they step forward in that way, being open to that reconciliation, should they show and demonstrate that they have taken responsibility and accountability for their actions. That's not judgment. That's a judgment call. You're not telling them, you've got to take responsibility and accountability for what you did to me. That's not what's going on here. What you're actually doing is making a judgment call. Okay, they've stepped forward. They've obviously done some work, been reflective. They have obviously, with what they're saying to me now, taken accountability and responsibility for themselves and their actions within that given situation. I can take them back into my life and we can reconcile. Or you may choose to just say, thank you, I really appreciate that, and I'm so pleased for you. But actually, my life is moved forward now. My life is in a different place now, but I wish you well. Just because somebody apologizes doesn't mean that we have to bring them back into our life. Only you can make that judgment call for yourself. Practicing gratitude, always looking, because let's be honest, life happens and there's going to be a mix because we live in polarities, because we understand our world by polarities. There is going to be a mixture of what's going on every day, every hour, every minute, every second. And so we teach ourselves to focus on the positive aspects. And when I say positive aspects, I'm not talking about what I call the toxic positivity where, oh, everything's wonderful, when it's actually not. No, it's about being able to sit in chaos and go, okay, what is this teaching me? Rather than sitting in chaos and going, this is really stressful, this is really stressful. It's a different mindset. That gratitude allows us to adapt our mindset so we can look at every aspect of life, every situation in life, and go, okay, what's in this for me to learn or to grow or to experience? Well, what's going on here? What can I take from this? What can I use from this given situation? How can I learn? How can I evolve? How can I ascend? How can I continue to move forward? And that does take practice. And that is why practicing gratitude is really good. Now, when I am with clients that are new to all this, I actually talk about a gratitude jar. And it's really old and it's such a simple practice. And you kind of think, how does that work? But it does work. When you're not used to practicing gratitude, it does work to be able to see a clear glass jar start to fill up with little bits of paper as you pass it. You have to put it, for it to work effectively, you have to put that jar in a place within your home that you pass continuously. And you have to remember to put those slips of paper in there. to fill it up. Something great happened, or something terrible happened, but you learned something great. Write it down, fold it up, put it in the jar. And on those days where you're really struggling, and there will be days when you really struggle, when your energies are really low, you can look at that jar. And not only can you look at that jar, you can stick your hand in and you can take some of those papers out and you can read them. And I can guarantee that ignites a spark within you that will help you lift yourself energetically that day, or in that given circumstance, whatever it is that's brought you down at that low, it will reignite. It's like a breath of fresh air, and breathing into that tiny little ember, so we reignite the flames within you and get you going again. Lastly, it's seeking support. Now, our go-to is usually our friends and family, but if we've been in dysfunctional relationships and we're working through that, friends and family are not always the best people to go to, because they know the old you, and so they will very often give you advice for the old you rather than the new you or the you that you want to become. Be mindful of that. Remember that they have their own agendas. When we're going through a process of change, when we're going through a process of evolving, that can make the people around us uncomfortable to begin with. And if you're using them as your support, there is the potential, and they don't do it intentionally. Let's just get that out there straight away. But there is the potential for them to advise what they want to see. There's a bit of an agenda there for them, because they don't want you to change, because they like you the way you are. The fact that you don't like you the way you are and you want something different in your life and you want to change, it doesn't come into the equation in those moments, unfortunately, or for the majority. So just be aware of that. Sometimes it's good to get an outside party, a therapist. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you, or it just gives you a non-biased person in which to be able to openly express yourself and to buff ideas off of. A therapist will not tell you what to do. What a therapist and a coach will do is to ask skilled questions that have you digging even deeper into yourself so that you can find your answers. As I said right at the beginning, forgiveness is the prelude to self-love, but we need a certain amount of self-love to actually recognize that we need to start applying the forgiveness to others and ourselves, and releasing old resentments, wounds, and hurts. Everything's cyclical. There is no magic trick. This is taking one step at a time, moving forward to the life you want. Be patient with yourselves. You can do this. You've got this. I have faith in every single one of you. So that's it for this week. You have been listening to Spiritual Midwife, and I wish to see you on the next one.